Well, great evening, everyone. It is 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think people are coming in slowly. I am Dr. Karen Owens. I'm adjunct faculty and director of strategic research at Hood Theological Seminary. Welcome to our first session of the Pathways for Tomorrow Fall Series, Project 2025 and its impact on the church. And we're honored to have with us our guest facilitators, Dr. Cassandra Gould and Dr. Obery Hendricks Jr. And you may have already read about them when you registered, but I'll highlight just a few things about both of them. The Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, also known as Pastor in the Public Square. She's an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, where she serves as an associate pastor at Metropolitan AME in Washington, D.C. Her pastoral experience includes serving as a senior pastor in Missouri for 10 years, and she serves currently as the director of power building at the Faith in Action National Network, where she coordinates the work of the Faith Leadership, Federation Engagement, and Immigration departments. Her work allows her to develop and facilitate training for faith leaders for justice formation at the intersection of faith and politics in the United States and in Ghana. She's an alum of Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, and was a Samuel DeWitt Proctor Fellow at United Theological Seminary, where she earned the Doctor of Ministry degree. And her work over the last 2 years has included equipping Christian faith leaders with the tools to deconstruct the theology of white Christian nationalism and to disrupt the implementation of Project 2025. Dr. Obery Hendricks Jr. is the visiting scholar in the departments of Religion and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia University. He's a former professor emeritus at New York Theological Seminary and former president of Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio. He's a former distinguished senior fellow at the Democracy Collaborative in Washington, D.C., and is the author of several books, The Politics of Jesus, Christians Against Christianity, Living Water, and The Universe Bends Towards Justice. And so I don't know if Dr. Lattimore is with us. Dr. Lattimore, are you present? Well, on behalf of Dr. Lattimore, president of Hood Theological Seminary, I welcome those of you who are here. I'm not sure, we've got just a small crowd this evening, so I'm not sure if people are having difficulty logging on. Nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and begin. Just a few reminders. We do remain grateful for those of you who are here, and we're going to ask that you please keep your devices muted throughout the session. It's going to be recorded and you'll receive it in your inboxes in the next week or so. And also the presenters will address your questions or comments, so please feel free to put them in the chat. And then at 7:20, before we conclude, there will be a brief survey that we're going to ask you to be so kind to complete, and it will also be put in the chat. This free course offering is presented via the Pathways for Tomorrow initiative of the Lilly Endowment. And I also want to thank Mr. John Everett, Ms. Kelly Bryant, and Mrs. Sandra Oliver for their valued assistance and support. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Gould and Dr. Hendricks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Owens, for facilitating this important session and on an important subject that really all Americans need to know about, and the Black Church we need to know about it in particular. Dr. Gould's going to talk a little bit more about this, but just a word about the origins of the Heritage Foundation, which sponsored Project 2025. It was founded largely by Paul Weyrich, who was also founder of the Moral Majority. So we know then that the Heritage Foundation has neo-supremacist and white supremacist origins. And so it's no surprise that they have put together a series of measures to further, white supremacist gains in American society under the auspices of a supposed constructive agenda for the Republican Party if by some sad chance Donald Trump is to win the presidency. But first, just want to mention some things that will affect the Black church in particular, will financially impact the Black church. One is Project 2025 seeks to cut Social Security. And Social Security is cut. We know that because we have a large percentage of seniors who support the church, that will negatively impact finances. The same with cutting Medicare. Project 2025 seeks to cut Medicare. That also cut into the income, the disposable income of those who support the church. It looks to end the Affordable Care Act, which will increase medical costs for members. Excuse me, pardon me, I'm fighting an allergy. It'll increase medical expenses for all Americans, but particularly, Black Americans who have a lower economic status than the rest of the demographics. It will impact us, and therefore it will impact the finances of the church. The project looks to raise prescription drug prices, which is criminal, but that's what it looks to do, because we have to remember that Project 2025 and its MAGA and Republican supporters, that they are in league with the corporate sector. The Republican Party has also always been hand in hand with the Republican Party. And the pharmaceutical industry has a very strong lobby. And so they want to raise prescription drug prices. And Project 2025 has incorporated that in its program. And then the project wants to eliminate unions and worker protections. And that's very, very dangerous, because if you eliminate unions, then there's really no bulwark against the depredations and exploitation of corporations, the corporate sector of workers. And that also means that there'll be no collective bargaining. It means that workers' salaries and wages will be lowered, will be weakened. And what does that mean? Well, it means that there'll be less income, less disposable income, and Black citizens, well, all citizens, but Black citizens probably more so. And that also will affect the finances of the church. So the measures I outlined are measures that, if enacted, will weaken our churches. Financially, they will weaken our churches, and with fewer resources, there'll be less that churches can do to benefit our communities. The right wing and its churches, they have a big wellspring of finances to call on. Not so Black churches so much, unless they're in league with the right wing. And then there are measures that will affect the Black lives in the church. And one that Project 2025 wants to raise the retirement age. And we know that Black folks die earlier than white folks on average, so we won't be able to enjoy retirement to the same extent that whites will. It seeks to expedite capital punishment. And we know that Black folks are disproportionately subjected to capital punishment relative to the larger population. So that will negatively impact us also. You know, Black folks are much quicker to get capital punishment than whites. It will end marriage equality, and those same gender loving people in our congregations, their lives will be upended and torn asunder. The project also wants to engage in mass deportation of immigrants and incarceration of them in camps. And in our churches, many of our churches, we have large numbers of immigrants, African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants. We have from immigrants from south of the border. Project wants to end birthright citizenship, which means that if you're born in America, and to parents who are not American citizens, as it is now, if you're born in America and you're an American citizen, well, they want to change that. So that if you're a second generation American, they don't want you to be able to have birthright citizenship. Why? Because that will lower the number of Black and brown folks in America. It seeks to condemn single mothers while promoting what they call traditional families, which is a nuclear family. Well, the biblical family is extended family. And wanting to promote traditional families is take a very narrow view of what should be supported by policy in America. Something very dangerous, they want to teach Christian indoctrination in public schools. All right. It's indoctrination. And why? Because it's going to be Christian nationalism that they will teach, which has an undercurrent of not just Christian supremacy, but white supremacy. It's very dangerous. And that will be over against what goes on in Black churches. And that is extremely dangerous, the teach Christian indoctrination in public schools. Part of what they'll be teaching is if Christian indoctrination gives women a secondary social status, some of the MAGA folks and the folks supporting the project actually, and we're talking about elected officials, actually question whether women should continue to have the vote. So we're talking about something very dangerous here. They want to ban all abortions without exceptions. That includes those who which threaten the mother's lives or as a result of rape and incest. They don't give a darn. And that's very socially dangerous. They want to ban contraceptives. Like everybody can afford to have 10 children in their family. It makes no sense. They want to use public taxpayer money for private religious schools. And what does that mean? Less money for public education. They want to end all civil rights protections, ban African American and gender studies in all levels of education. They want to ban books and curriculum about slavery. We're talking about these folk who, if this project is if they're able to put it into practice, that it will be against the law for us to teach our children our history in this country. And there are many other measures. I'm going to stop there because Dr. Gould's going to come in and we can discuss some of the others later on today. But suffice it to say, this is an extremely dangerous development. And it behooves us, for ourselves and our children, to make sure that those who support Project 2025 do not get into power.
Thank you, Dr. Hendricks, for getting us started. And I have to name, that it was Dr. Hendricks' scholarship, his most recent book, Christians Against Christianity, that really just struck a chord in me, that had me start to really go deeper around the current impact of white Christian nationalism. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. One of the mistakes that I think that we've been making in this moment is believing that this is kind of a Trump era phenomenon, or that this is specifically related to Trump, right? Certainly it will be a lot easier for him, but this project is really a blueprint that is in place for anybody that would have been the next Republican candidate. And so while this might be a nonpartisan conversation, we have to actually name the facts around who these people are, what they believe, and how dangerous they are. And so in their own words, this is how they describe Project 2025. A historic movement, nonetheless, brought together by over 100 respected organizations from across the conservative movement to take down what they refer to as the deep state and return the government to the people. So very connected to this MAGA idea of let's make America great again. These people who normally are, constitutionalists and believe deeply, allegedly, in the Constitution and etc., they have this conspiracy theory around what government has become, and this deep state in their mind is a way in which government has been taken over and folk are trying to take something from them. So that it really operates out of a kind of a theological framework of scarcity, to be honest about it. And they call it a mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. They originally published it, put it all together last April 2023. And again, this is in their own words, a product of more than 400 scholars and policy experts offering a menu of policy suggestions to meet our country's deepest challenge and put America back on track. And so, particularly in a Black church context, we have to ask ourselves, when folks start talking about back, how far back on track are they trying to put America, right? Is this back to, Jim Crow era of, for colored only, for white only? Is this back to, I saw someone's question in here about enslavement. If America becomes a dictator on day one, as a particular candidate has promised, everything, including enslavement, honestly, is on the table. And so we got to wrestle with that, right? We have to wrestle with, as using Black church in a broad sense of it, of the word, while we're not a monolith, in a broad sense of the concept, not being a monolith, but we are a church collectively, right? Born out of protest, out of struggle, out of a place so that people could do faith without the oppressive tactics of systems that are against us. This 922-page document is centered around 4 different pillars. One of them is a policy agenda. And so what Dr. Hendricks just shared with us were some of the very specific policies. I'm going to talk about tease out a few more of them in a few minutes, but some of the particular policies that they are basically crafting so that when a Republican president, and in this case, if God forbid, Trump would become president again, you don't have to think. Here is the policy. Here are the policies and the proposals that we need you to enact. In addition to that, while we have been, distracted, our beloved Toni Morrison reminds us that white supremacy, racism, is a distraction and keeps you focused not doing whatever your real work is, while we've been distracted by so many things, including some of our own shenanigans in the church, if we're honest. They've been actually training and recruiting a talent pool of folk, what they describe as an effective conservative administration, a presidential administration academy. They've got more than 30 online courses that feature experts, in their own words, who share knowledge with the next generation. So they're trying to literally have this, Jim and Jane Crow 4.0, basically, to come in and operate in the spaces of government across the board. I'm not talking about a talent pool of just who gets to be in the White House, but across the board in the few government entities that will be left when they finish. From that training pool, they're creating a personnel database. So they're making a clarion call to conservatives from, in their own words, from all walks of life to come and serve in the presidential administration, as well as in the few government entities that will be left. And then there's this 180-day playbook that actually, again, Mr. President, you don't have to think. And if it's this particular president, thinking might not be their strong suit anyway. So it's just like, turn to page 10 and let's enact these things, right? And, Dr. Hendricks talked about white Christian nationalism. Again, not a new phenomenon, right? Evangelicals, conservative evangelicals, from Southern Baptists to others, have actually been giving cover to this kind of ideology, this kind of anti-Blackness, this kind of anti-immigrant sentiment for a long time. They are the people who really intertwine God and country in their minds, in their small minds. God came down from the cosmos to help create the United States for the benefit of white, wealthy, heterosexual appearing men. So that means if you're not white, wealthy, heterosexual appearing male, everybody else is at risk. Everybody else is at risk. And we know, in the words of Malcolm X, if America gets a cold, Black folk get pneumonia. And so it puts us more at risk. And so one of the things that I'm trying to help people understand is that white Christian nationalism, and that's not just white people, but this ideology of whiteness that puts whiteness above and over and against everything else, whiteness and Christianity over and against everything and everybody else. It's on the ballot, not just for who will get to Pennsylvania Avenue. It's on the ballot in your school board election, on the ballot in your municipal elections, on the ballot for who will represent you in the halls of Congress and in the Senate. And so as Black folk, right, Black people of faith who are called to stand in opposition of oppression. That is what Dr. Hendricks would call the politics of Jesus, right? And so the ways in which we have to activate ourselves, not just on the ballot, but actually to take the mic back and to not allow this to be the only narrative of faith that folk are receiving, right? This Heritage Foundation that he talks about, whose headquarters right here in DC. I'm sitting a couple of miles from it right now. They have worked across all kinds of lines, right? They're working with soccer moms, like Moms for Liberty, who started as 3 little white soccer mom homemakers down in obscure part of Florida in the summer of 21, and now has over 250 chapters across the country, who go and stake out school boards for the seats, as well as sign up for every slot in the meetings, And so a part of what we have to do is to not just sit on the sidelines, but what is our opportunity to go and represent our children, our values of our community and et cetera in these places. But it's well funded. I was Dr. Hendricks and I last week were talking a little bit about, this kind of notion of what's at stake for the church. And a part of what we have to disrupt in ourselves is this way in which everybody that says Jesus, we just, we run to them. We want to listen to them on TV. We want to send them our little coins and etc. The Franklin Grahams of the world, the Paula Whites of the world, and etc. These are people who literally target us in every way that's possible, right? For some, they're targeting us to exploit us, but those are the kind of ways, those are the kind of people and the organizations that the Heritage Foundation has put together. Focus on Family, Turning Point, those kind of organizations that are not foreign to us. They are working in sync with them. That's a part of the more than 100 allegedly respectable organizations that they've put together to bring forth Project 2025. Project 2025 is the manifesto of white Christian nationalists and the evangelical movement. It is their manifesto of how they want this country to be and how they want our lives to be impacted. When I say faith is at stake, there are people, we know the statistics, right? Before COVID, there were folk missing from our pews and in our Zoom rooms, etc., right? And so faith is at stake. One of my things I'm always quoting from Dr. Hendricks is around the salient silence of the so-called left, and I'll even say of the Black church and of the church with a big C. If the only narrative people get around faith is a cross that they paraded around on January the 6th, that's no narrative, right? And so our ability to actually reclaim faith, the gospel of Jesus Christ in this moment really matters. When we think about the gospel, I've been really thinking about this kind of juxtaposition, right, of Matthew 25. Our food pantries, our clothing banks, because we like charity more than we like justice. That's a whole different webinar. But all of those things that we actually kind of model from this parable that Jesus is giving in Matthew 25. And so this is what Project 2025 does, right? As people of faith, Christ-following people of faith, when people are hungry, we feed them. But we also go a step further and confront the systems that cause hunger. Project 2025, you heard Dr. Hendricks talk about cutting Medicare, Medicaid, which impacts the most vulnerable. It also sets out to cut food stamps, school lunches, to end the summer school programs. Page 93 literally spells that out for us. If you got insomnia, I'll give you the link. You can read it if it doesn't make you sick while reading it. Raise the price of food, right? So it's already hard enough to be able to afford food, but think about working families, the working poor, and etc. That parable, Jesus says, when I was thirsty, right, did you give me something to drink, right? I've been struck by clean water. Having spent time in Flint, Michigan in 22 at a church and trying to get out the vote in a midterm election. And I'm at a church where they gave out at least 800 cases of water that day. And they're telling me about how the water's still not clean, right? It's only clean for a certain number of people. We need the Environmental Protection Agency. What Project 2025 does, and they spell this out, is that they want to gut the EPA, right?
Mhm.
And restructure it in a way that gives Black folk and brown folk no recourse. I lived a lot of my life in St. Louis. There's a HBO documentary on Coldwater Creek. It's in an area that mostly Black folk live in. And it is radioactive waste. A part of what they plan to do is to eliminate the standalone Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. That was the office that people in Flint were able to get to advocate on their behalf so that they could get some form of restoration and some form of justice. Black and brown communities are more likely to have toxic waste than other communities, right? And so that also means if this is gone, then we won't have that kind of protection that we have. And ICE raids, right? Some of you remember in 2017 under the Trump administration, people were rounded up. Well, this manifesto, they spend pages, starting on 142, talking about how they are going to round up not the people who came last week, but people who have lived and worked in the U.S. for many years. It'll separate families. It also will end. Right now, you could have a sanctuary church and etc. It means that it'll end all of that protection. People will be at houses of worship, at schools, and etc. Actually coming and getting the people, right? Getting the people. And so we really have to be able to stop that, because how might my church be affected? You can be in my church worshiping and they show up to pull you out of the worship. That the impact of that means nobody's safe in a sanctuary. And so those are the kinds of things we have to be concerned about. We already talked about health and how Medicare and Medicaid will be impacted. Think about the number of people, whether they are people that you serve through the mission of your church or the people that are actually in the pews of your church, that will be deeply impacted by those kinds of cuts. And let me tell you something. I don't care how resourceful your church is. You can be at the number one big steeple church in the city. We don't have enough resources to provide the charity that will be necessary to actually offset these kind of cuts and etc. Right? And so these are the kinds of things, y'all, that we really got to not just wrestle with, but we got to be able to actually speak up. The elimination of the Department of Education, what they really want to do is really privatize education, period. So elimination of public schools as we know it, and elimination of Head Start. According to the Center on Budget and Policy, last year in 2023, over 822,000 children were in Head Start. They were budgeted. There was a budget for that many. If over 800,000 children are eliminated from Head Start, what do parents do? What do working poor do who don't have the money to provide child care for their children? Some of you on here might be products of Head Start programs or have family members, children, grandchildren, etc. that Head Start was an opportunity for them to have free education that you needed. Along those same lines, this way in which for them, this really damaging the separation of church and state by intertwining the two. We already have in Texas these chaplains, these uneducated, you all are in seminary right now at various levels, but seminaries, pastors, and etc. Untrained chaplains, just some lottie-dottie everyday people who might have been the greeter at Walmart yesterday, but they're a good Christian, and they now want to be a chaplain in the school. It is problematic on every level. And a part of that is not just disrupting education for our children, but think about the teaching jobs that will be lost, right? If the Department of Education is eliminated, we're talking 180,000 plus educators that won't have anywhere to go because they're part of a public school system that the architects of this plan, their plan is not to include them, right? And so in this moment, we have to wrestle with, we're not single issue voters. We live multi-issue lives. And so we have to be able to discern through the rhetoric, right? To actually say, I can't get stuck on, here's this one thing that I don't believe in, the XYZ person believe in. We have to look at this collaborative and actually start to understand that the policies that are proposed here are literally intended to actually just diminish our quality of life. We talk a lot about saving democracy. I actually, depending on who I'm talking to, what I'm talking about is not saving democracy, but saving our livelihood and saving our lives, right? It is the difference between food on the table and not food on the table. It's the difference between having the freedom to go to a place of worship that feels safe and not being able to do that. And it literally could be the difference because statistics show that these people are 40% more inclined to engage in political violence. It could be the difference between being alive and being dead. If a candidate is promising, not proposing, but promising a Muslim man on day one, day two will be a black man. And so as people of faith, as preachers, as lay folk, particularly in the black church, what is at stake is the very essence of the faith that we claim to believe, and our very lives is really at stake. And so that's the conversation that we need to deeply engage in. And I got news for you now. We need to defeat it on November 5th, but it's not going to go away on November 5th. And so we also have to make a deeper commitment to actually engage in this, not just in a conversation, but in taking action, again, in examining the ballot up and down. And we also have to engage in the work of disentangling ourselves from the kind of theological tropes that actually helps us to also oppress a different class of people, right? Well, we actually follow some of the evangelical teachings when it feels convenient for us so that we might oppress somebody else. I'm going to take a break, catch my breath. Dr. Obery.
No, thank you. You made some very important points. You raised some important points, and I'm very appreciative. One thing I want to clarify, and that is Donald Trump's involvement. Trump has been aware that they've been working on this for some time, and he's even publicly praised the people putting together Project 2025 and J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, boy, that dude. He actually wrote the introduction, maybe the preface to a book written by the executive director of the Heritage Foundation. So they're fully involved, and many of those who are writers who've written sections of the project come from Trump's own administration. So he's deeply involved. The line joke is saying he doesn't know anything about it. Well, man, I'm not even gonna get into him. He's so pitiful. He's so low down and pitiful. I think what's important to acknowledge that this is an evil onslaught that we're talking about. It's They really want to dominate American society in a way that will marginalize everybody who does not genuflect at the altar of their twisted beliefs. There's a propensity for violence that Dr. Gould mentioned, a real propensity for violence. And it's almost a stormtrooper mentality that we're talking about, because some of the instances, some of the things they want to put into practice can only be put into practice by force. Okay, and I guess they mean it to be forced by the government, but one cannot tell. We cannot tell where these people are going, and there are all kinds of crazy things they want to do. Like Trump they want to change things so that the president can fire all the civil service employees if he chooses, and he can replace them with folk who are loyal to him. And civil service was instituted so we wouldn't have those kinds of loyalty tests, loyalty litmus tests. But Project 2025 wants to do away with that. And a huge percentage of civil service employees are Black folks. So if this is put into place, then a lot of Black people will become unemployed as a result. They want to do away with the Food and Drug Administration. I mean, my God, the Food and Drug Administration stands before us being poisoned, and all kinds of madness they want to do with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which means, I mean, they want to have no studies for climate change. And we're seeing all this madness going, all this destruction going on. And they're saying, no, we don't even want to pay attention. We want to get rid of that. We're talking about it's almost like they want to go back to the dark ages. Lastly, this is patently anti-democratic. It is patently Christian nationalist and ideological. It is all about making everybody bow at the altar of their view of things, and that is a Christian supremacist, white supremacist view of what America should be. So it's extremely dangerous, and I agree, Dr. Gould. Our churches need to stop being so casual about Black life, because most of our churches aren't doing a darn thing to protect Black folk at all. And I'm even talking about our largest churches that have all the resources, not doing almost nothing, and it's ridiculous. The churches are not going to make the difference in this election, but the people in the churches, if Trump wins, the people in the churches will suffer inordinately. So what can we do? Well, I guess continue to try to raise people's consciousness here. But what we should also learn from this is to try to light a fire under preachers, maybe indict them, maybe embarrass them for their sorriness, or forget about them and look in another directions. Because if we, with the zillions of churches we have, we're still suffering like this, churches aren't doing a darn thing. If it doesn't change later for them. And that has nothing to do with turning our back on God, because a lot of these churches don't have a lot to do with the gospel anyway. I mean, when you get down to it. So, I mean, I'm sorry, these jokers make me so mad, because they're just so sorry. And even in our educational institutions, I'm talking about our seminaries, I'm glad to see Hood is doing this. But so many of our seminaries, they're not preparing folk to come out and be freedom fighters, just the opposite. They're not preparing them to be peacemakers, they're preparing to be peacekeepers. And we need to fight against that too. So anyway, getting ready to start preaching here, and this is not the forum.
But I'm with you, right? This is why I like rocking with Dr. Hendricks. I mean, we two ordained clergy telling you this, and calling out, right, the church with a big C, the Black church, just the church in general. As I said, it cannot only be the faith, that it cannot be the only faith narrative that's out there, right? This cannot be it. And it is literally the antithesis of the gospel. And so, for those of you who are in particularly in seminary, you have to also think about in a D-Man program, you are many already pastoring and etc. But you got to think about, like, what is my responsibility? And who is my ultimate responsibility to? And am I willing to basically abdicate my responsibility from God? Because that's what we're doing when we're silent about this, right?
Yeah,
And silence kills.
ministerial ministerial malpractice, right?
Ministerial malpractice. That is exactly correct. And so we talk about the implication for the church. That's the implication. Is the church really going to be the church? And again, whether you're looking at Pew or Gallup or Barna, or just being honest about who's in the pews on Sunday morning, who's in the Zoom room, folk already making the decision to make an exit. They're not leaving God. But they are leaving this kind of impotent gospel that we've created, right? This impotent kind of way of being that does not cause us to confront anything, but only allows us to kind of collect the accoutrements of ministry. We've kind of bastardized the gospel, to be honest, in the way in which we have focused on. I don't know when preaching became, the Hollywood of the gospel, but we've celebritized all of these things. And we want to focus more on our likes and our shares and our followers than we do on the impact of the most vulnerable people in our communities and in our pews. So Project 2025, if nothing else, ought to be a clarion call to actually return to the real gospel of Christ. I really just don't know how else to say that for you all.
Well, no, you're so right. I mean, I totally agree with you. There's it's our responses are so pitiful, and because and part of it is well in addition to that, we don't pay attention to the dangers here. For instance, right, Dr. Gould, right, they're talking about being able to use the military to break up domestic protests. That's like saying sending the army in on the March on Washington. I mean, it's the last time that happened in any significant way was during the Great Depression when Herbert Hoover sent the army in to disperse the protests by veterans in Washington D.C., ended up killing people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
as a person who spent a lot of her life in St. Louis, the home of Ferguson, who stood in the face closer to tanks than I am to this screen right now, I really take that personal, right? And I know that I would be a person at risk, right? I don't protest just to protest, but I'm not afraid of standing in front of and between young folk, whether they're advocating for stopping to killing folk in Palestine or something else. And so it literally puts us at risk, right? And that is the reality. We've already seen a militarization of law enforcement, but literally engaging the military from a candidate who the Supreme Court has given carte blanche, right, to go and do whatever you want to do, really, to your enemies, right?
And he has said, and he has a propensity for violence. I mean, he's a coward, always trying to act tough, but he's talked about cops hurting people. Why don't you hurt them more? He's talked about all that kind of stuff. He also wants to free cops from responsibility for killing people. I forgot, I don't recall the exact language right now, but the cops have a liability. He wants to take and totally free them of liability for harming, for being sued and held responsible for harming citizens. I mean, it goes on and on. They want to deregulate business. You know, when you want to deregulate business, these are not just regulations, they're regulatory protections of the average people. When you want to deregulate, that means you want to remove the protections for the average people. They want to remove market protections. So that means it'll be easier for you to be exploited and misled, and it'll be easier for corporations to bleed people, to raise prices injudiciously. I mean, we're talking about a real, it's an elitist onslaught. Not only is it about dominating American society with Christian nationalist principles, but it's also about dominating America by big business and corporations. So we're talking about an American oligarchy that exists right now as an oligarchy. They're trying to make it even more so, and to give the president as much power. They want to give the president the power. I mean, we have three branches of government. Well, the Project 2025 wants to make the executive branch more powerful than the others, give the executive branch many more powers. That makes it easy to become a dictator. And it's almost like they want to open up the government so we can have a dictator. And they do want a dictator because in their short-sightedness, they think that a dictator the only kind of dictators we can have are those that serve them. They don't realize that other folk have ideas too. So it's not just a group of policy proposals. It is an onslaught. I call it an evil onslaught because it seeks to harm and oppress and exploit innocent people only for their own gain. So it's ungodly. It's heretical. It represents the worst that we have. It is probably the worst set of proposals that we have had since Jim Crow, maybe.
Yeah.
It's just so dangerous. And what's so enraging is that we're hearing so few public figures, including in our churches, alert the people to the danger that confronts them, that their children can end up killed or in jail for protesting against wrongs. It's really a frightening reality facing us.
Yeah. And along the gender issue, I think you brought up particularly the marriage equality, but just in general, the way in which this set of policies seeks to actually target our LGBTQIA plus siblings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not of God, right? In addition to that, I mean, these are the people who called, women who, for whatever reason, don't have children, and many by choice, mostly by choice, childless cat women, right? Like this way of just dehumanizing, again, everybody that's not white, wealthy, and heterosexual presenting males. And so everybody else is at risk, right? There's not we can't educate ourselves away from being in the risk. If you're Black, you're at risk, right? And so literally identifying with that kind of theology is also problematic. And so it's really, I really applaud Dr. Owens and the administration of Hood for just making this accessible, right? I mean, it really is a clarion call to actually do something, right? To engage everybody got some apathetic cousin, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, somebody folk in your circle who are apathetic and etc., who want to sit the election out and all of those things. It's really a call to give people what they need. Talk about the ways in which, not just from a 50,000 foot view, but talk about, you know, somebody who has Head Start or was a product of Head Start. You know, somebody who needs food stamps, has used food stamps. Talk about how it impacts the household, right? And again, the churches, we will not be able to have enough charitable response to this. And so we do
Yeah,
well.
we can't fill the gap. The churches can never fill the
We
gap.
can't. We can't. We, first of all, it's not. We just can't. We never could. And in this case, it would be such a tremendous loss, which honestly will end up being a loss of life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you're already talking about the most vulnerable people, children, the widows and the orphans, as the Bible would say, right? And so our ability, if we, you know, I always say, if you're not going to be church, don't have church. And so, if we are just going to be who we even say we are, it is an opportunity to deeply engage in the disruptive work of the gospel, right?
Yeah, that's true. You know, I noticed on the chat, I don't know if this is a male or female, is RC Weber, gives us some, clarifies something for us. Appreciate it. What I was talking about was qualified immunity, which a public official, which includes cops, that they're immune from prosecution. In the absence, it says, of a clear and outrageous violation of existing law, which is subjective, which means that the cops will continue to get the benefit of the doubt. Also mentions sovereign immunity as when a state is insulated from civil litigation. In other words, no one will be responsible for oppression or
That's right.
or death.
Yeah.
That's the frightening thing. Are there any, Dr. Owens, were there questions? Looking in the chat, are there questions that you want to address?
I think Dr. Sam Oliver, did you? Let's see, were you've raised this point, Dr. Oliver, given the title of this webinar and the gravity of this dangerous and backward policy, the Black church sadly has been predictably silent. Are our clergy ignorant or are they cowards?
Ignorant and cowards. I don't know about cowards. A lot of them are uninformed because of, you know, backward church traditions, apolitical church traditions. Some of them are lazy. Some are entertainers, and they're more concerned about treating their congregations as audiences rather than congregations. A lot of them don't know any better, but I must say a whole lot of them don't care to know better. You know, I try to tell these guys, I ask sometimes, what the heck does it mean to be a shepherd? A shepherd works to protect the interests of the sheep. Now, two parts of that. One is that you have to be concerned enough to know what is threatening the interest and the harm and the welfare of the sheep of the flock that you are supposed to be pastoring. And a lot of them don't even take the time to find out. Barely read the newspaper. They don't know the issues. That's why some of these backward Negroes are actually supporting Trump. So yeah, so I don't use. Yeah, some are ignorant, but some are uninformed. Meaning, I mean, I want to acknowledge that some of them really don't know better. They think, like when I grew up with, it was like I'm not into politics. I don't put my faith in politicians. I put my faith in Christ. You know, that old timey stuff. We got to wake these folk up, but a lot of them just don't want to wake up. It's the easy way out. You know, my money, man, I'd get rid of 50-75% of preachers and start all over again, and put some folks who really want to make a difference in society, because these jokers, let me stop before I say something that it's very upsetting, very upsetting.
Yeah.
We're looking at a real concerted effort to mess over our people and to turn the clock back, give us fewer and fewer rights. We haven't even talked about elections and voting, what they want to do with elections and vote. We haven't even talked about that. They want to turn the clock back. And what are we doing? Sitting around hollering and screaming and speaking in fake tongues. And, Lord have mercy. And Shandala shut down. It's I see a hand raised over Deirdre McCullough.
Deirdre McCullers, you have a question?
I do, and thank y'all so much. This is my second time with Dr. Hendricks and Dr. Cassandra. And the only reason I said this is because I might mess up your last name. Y'all are phenomenal together. If he was good, y'all are excellent together. So thank y'all so much for this presentation. But my question in the chat was, do y'all think this is the beginning of putting us back into slavery?
As I said, it puts everything on the table, right? These are the descendants of the people who declared that we were 3/5 human. Okay, so all of it's on the table, and it will be legalized, right? Like legal enslavement. And where will you go, and what will you do when all of the regulatory bodies? So there's a long section, and again, in 922 pages, y'all. So long section in there about the DOJ, right? About Homeland Security and etc., and how they want to actually control these entities. And so that it will be on the table. Like I said, if a Muslim ban is on the first day, the black ban will be on the second day. And so that is what we got to wrestle with. I do want to, and I don't have anything different than what Dr. Hendricks said. I think some of it is willful ignorance, right? Absolutely. Veteran affairs. Like I said, there will be very few government entities left. I live in DC now. This economy is about folk who work for federal government, but that's not just limited to DC. That's all over the country, right? My now deceased mother-in-law worked for my kid's grandmother worked for the federal government in St. Louis, right? All over the country. Yeah, all over the country, there will be an elimination of jobs that are largely held by Black people. And around this thing with clergy, it is also, if you dine at the master's table, you don't want to disrupt your meal. And so these people who have actually made decisions about being a part of the empire, right? Michael Ray Matthews would call it being chaplains to the empire. No offense to chaplains, but being I like to say pallbearers of the empire, because we're dealing in an era of necropolitics, right?
Armor bearers.
Yeah, they're armor bearers of the empire, right? They are armor bearers of the empire, right? Armor bearers and pallbearers, right? Honorary pallbearers. You ain't touching the casket, but you sure helping it get in the ground, because you are not willing to disrupt the death-dealing kind of political ideology, theology, and the policies that actually deal death to our people, including having assault weapons in the streets, right? And so if you're not doing that, right now, I see my classmate on here, Erica Neal, talking about our need to have material things. I would go beyond our need, because everybody, thinking about Maslow's hierarchy, everybody got basic needs for material things, but it is the allure of materials, right? This allure of is capitalism and how it has impacted us as well, that actually prevents us from adhering to this lifestyle of Jesus that honestly gets you thrown off the cliff, right? And nobody wants to get thrown off the cliff, so we just choose this easy way out.
Yeah, and I want to add something about slavery, though. The 13th Amendment does allow slavery for those. In fact, what does it say? It says neither slavery, there should not be slavery or involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So now, we've seen in the past with for-profit prisons, there was one particularly egregious case in which judges were sending children to the private prisons for minor offenses because they got a kickback, per student. Imagine if the Christian nationalists get into office and with all of the repressive measures that they are proposing, it's not hard to imagine that a lot more Black folk will be incarcerated and subject to slavery, and there will be no guardrails against that. So yes, the question is, does it portend a reestablishment of slavery? Well, yeah, I mean, there's slaves now, but there'll be a lot more slaves. That will include probably undocumented immigrants who will be enslaved and put to work for next to nothing in the migrant fields. It's extremely dangerous, the things that they will be able to do if we don't stop this, because it takes away so many of the guardrails protecting basic rights under the Constitution. And lastly, remember, their standard bearer is a moral degenerate who says that maybe the Constitution should be suspended or terminated. He said, that's, I mean, for some a potential president of the United States to say that should have disqualified him immediately. It didn't. So these jokers are, some of these toothless, backward, good old boys and girls are saying, well, maybe we need a dictator. They have no idea what the heck they're thinking about. It's really that frightening. So yeah, slavery is on the table.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see it right away if they get in office. And we're talking about protesters, and we're talking about activists who could be enslaved if they're convicted. I mean, the Constitution allows it. What will stop it? Dr. Owens, are there any other questions?
Let's see. I don't think you did speak to Erica Neal's question. Dr. Gould did.
I
I
would
don't.
just add to that, Erica, it's also, this ecclesiastical responsibility for folk preachers to lean in on what that real model of Jesus's life is too, right? We've reduced Jesus, just like we've reduced Dr. King, to some, I'm all about love, right? But when Jesus is kicking over tables in the temple, it's not him giving out hugs, y'all, right? It is him literally challenging those who say that they are people of faith, who claim that they are proclaiming that which God says, all while assisting the empire, right? Being the armor bearers of the empire and keeping people enslaved. All about how the church is also guilty of exploitation. And so there are ways in which, I've struggled a long time with, like, why are folks just silent? Like, I want to fight, right? Like, what's wrong with you? But I also recognize, I've been recognizing that, well, to show up and speak power outside would also mean that you got to own the ways in which you are purveyors of injustice internally. And so that, like, we got to wrestle with those things too, collectively as a community, and and I still believe in the Black church-ish, ish, right. I still believe in our potential to do the things that, that we were formed to do, right? But it is going to take us having hard conversations and doing the hard work, not being lazy, right? And not just, performing on Sunday, but actually challenging even our own behavior.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And there's something else. The project changes the perspective. It claims to be guided by the Christian gospel, but the biblical ideal is concerned for the common good. It's egalitarian. It's about justice, about everybody having the opportunity to be, having the right to be all right. The project, it's about individualism. It's not about the common good. It doesn't serve egalitarian justice. It serves libertarian justice. Libertarian justice would say that the Good Samaritan was a sucker, because libertarianism says that we really don't have a responsibility to help other people. It's all right if you want to, but you don't have a responsibility. And Project 2025, which, as Dr. Gould pointed out, is suffused with capitalist logic, individualistic capitalist logic. It would also it would severely impact the ethos of many churches. It will not only hurt the community, but many churches will be move away from egalitarian justice, that all people have a right to be all right, and it'll start talking about individual interests. And of course, our interests are always lower on the totem pole. So it will change the ethos of religion as it's practiced in America today. I mean, we see very little about the common good, but it'll be much more marginalized and much more demonized. I mean, looking out for the common good is a biblical ideal, but it will be demonized as communism. It'll be demonized as heretical. It will just upset the entire social balance of America as we know it.
So this has been incredible. I am not I'm not a seminarian. I come from a historian background, but I'm thinking if our churches can begin to teach Jesus in the way that Jesus was, as Dr. Gould said, not that he didn't heal the sick, not that he didn't, raise, but he was a revolutionary to the core, to the point that he was willing to die for his cause. Now, and my comment earlier was really related to what are we really willing to sacrifice? And do we understand the sacrifice that we who call ourselves Christians, followers of Christ, do we understand and are we taught what sacrifice is, what that means completely? Because if where we are and if we are, then we're not afraid, well, to speak out, because I can't speak out because I can't lose my job. Because I'm beyond the basic. I'm talking the basic needs. I'm talking about we've convinced ourselves that we need these things. So no, I can't speak out. I can't act. And then the other thing is we don't know our history. None of this 2025 does not shock me, because white people are being white people. And they've been white people since we've been here. So it's nothing new about that. but we don't know our history. And because we don't know it, we can't teach our children. We're in an uproar because they're taking Black history out of the curriculum in schools. Well, put it in your home. That should be taught in your home. I work in schools. The things that happens in schools are so diametrically different from what it was when we were in school. It is shocking. I am shocked every day. And again, it's because we don't know our history. We don't even value education the way our parents did in a 50-year period.
That's
So the
absolutely
things that we need to know are not being taught to us, and we don't even have a thirst or desire to go and fetch them and bring them back, because we're so caught up in the material accoutrements of this world. And I can't lose these things that money have bought to
Sister,
save my soul.
Yeah, can I just interject? Those are very good points, and there are two things. And one reason they want to limit access to education, because the less educated, the more ignorant people are of their rights, of their possibilities, of their history, the easier it is to control, and that they really want to control Black and white. I mean, they really want to this is really a bid to subjugate all of us. But on the other hand, you make another good point in that our churches can teach. You know, I grew up in the Black nationalist movement with Mary Barack in Newark, and we had citizen education programs. We went out and there were a lot of Black nationalist organizations that were raising consciousness and teaching what was going on in the political sphere and all that. Our churches can do that, in Sunday schools, instead of the pablum that they deal with. Sometimes they can deal with that. They can have session after church, social justice, social consciousness, social awareness sessions. I mean, our churches should be our primary teaching mechanisms. But then again, look what our churches are. I mean, they're largely entertainment, when you have people saying ridiculous things like hallelujah is the highest form of praise, and foolishness like that. I mean, what is that? I mean, how's that aggrandizing anyone? How's that lifting up and edifying anyone? So yeah, we need to do all that. We need to take our place as the educators and the social consciousness raisers of our community.
Yeah. And thank you, Erica. That's my classmate. Whose family owns a wonderful Black History museum in St. Louis. But one of the things I was Faith in Action, Faith in Florida, one of our federations, they have over 400 churches that decided to teach Black history, not just in February, but year round, when their governor got rid of it, right? And so there are, some glimmers of hope, but you're absolutely right about and as lay folk, like challenge folk, right? If you're in the church and it's not what they're doing, then you have an opportunity to challenge that as well, right? I continue to tell colleagues, I'm like, how many more, chicken dinners do you need from the mayor or the governor or wherever, or these unfunded commissions that you find yourself on just to put something else on your resume while your people are in peril? And so we have our work cut out for us. And I have hope in places like Hood Seminary, places like Eden Seminary, who started, Dr. Hendricks and I started off with this year talking about this, that are actually trying to reshape at least the current students who are in theological education, but we got a lot of work to do.
Dr. Gould, this is, I think, the third Christian nationalist session we've done this year, right?
It is. Yeah, it's 3. Yeah.
Yeah. and it's no less infuriating
Right.
every time.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank both of you. We're winding down the time. Dr. Virgil Lattimore, who is president of Hood Theological Seminary, is with us. Dr. Lattimore, would you like to say a few words? And we're glad that you have joined us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Owens, and thank you, Dr. Gould and Dr. Hendricks. It's always refreshing to hear your insights, which parallel those of 1865 when Bishop Hood sat solely on the state council, that he advocated for Blacks and other brown people to be able to do several things. One is to be on juries and to be jurists, and to have the right for redress. And so I think in the spirit of Bishop Hood, you have rang a loud clarion call for not only deep awareness of the churches and pastors. You mentioned being leaders. I say to being prophetic. Being prophetic, I mean, one is being shepherds. I think that word was used, being shepherds and advocates and priests. We can be priests, but also to be advocates. So I appreciate the insights that you've raised, and I'm delighted that you have been forthright in sharing your knowledge and your awareness that we all need. Thank you very much, Dr. Owens.
Thank you, Dr. Lattimore. I just have one comment. I wish that we had time to talk about Plan B. If the election turns out to be other than what we want it to be, you know, what do we do? What should plan?
Oh,
Yeah. Well, I've been spending the bulk of my time, honestly, between all these Project 2025 trainings and trying to prepare people. And I can send you, like, we have this rapid response toolkit, and we're calling on churches to provide sanctuary. Anarchy could literally break out in the streets. Like January 6th could have been a dress rehearsal, right? And so we really cannot afford to wake up on. And so two things. If it turns out that there's not a lunatic in the White House, we still have to be prepared for foolishness in the streets, right? Black women will have a real target on our backs, even more than the targets we already have, right? And there will be our organizations, people might target you for doing this kind of thing. If it turns out where there is a lunatic in the White House, then we have to look at some personal security as well as organizational security. So even a school that dares to offer something like this, right? Think about Acorn. I don't know if you're familiar with Acorn, which is no more, thanks to George Bush, right? Because of the kind of advocacy and work that they were doing, not just that they didn't have the books, right? This is about being targeted. And so we actually have to start having those conversations now to actually be ready no matter who takes the White House.
That's right. Absolutely.
Getting
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I think it does highlight for us that we really have to get much more involved. I mean, we have to really question our churches and our theology, and we have to challenge them, and we have to challenge the imperial model of the pastorate too, because it's not the pew that's holding the church back. It's many these pastors, particularly the entertainers, those kinds of jokers. So yeah, hopefully it'll make us look at our churches a lot more strongly. Now I must say, when we were in Newark in the movement, we called some pastors out. We pulled one pastor out of his house and had an education conversation with him. He did better from that after that point. But you know, we need to stop fooling around. I mean, our people are dying, and these Negroes are just cutting up, acting a fool, entertaining, and all of that. And man, look, Jesus, they better hope Jesus doesn't come back. They talking about the Lord's coming. Now they better hope he don't come back. Because they in deep doo-doo. That's for doggone sure.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctors Gould and Hendricks.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. We really needed to hear this. We wish we had more time to engage you more deeply and to ask more questions, but our time is coming to an end. Dr. Sandra Oliver has put in the chat a survey. If you would please be so kind to fill it out. It's just very brief. And our next session in the series will occur Monday, November the 18th. And it's titled Political Actions from the Gospel Perspective. Dr. Hendricks will join us again alongside Reverend Tracy Blackman. So please be on the lookout for that Evite invitation and other details. It'll probably show up near the end of this month, early November. Again, we thank you so much for being present tonight. The email you will receive in about a week will include the recording from tonight's session. And again, if you would be so kind to fill out the survey. Thanks again, Dr. Gould, Dr. Cassandra Gould, and Dr. Obery Hendricks. When you complete the survey, you may exit the Zoom. Good night and take care.
Good night.